Imagine a slave without an army, without armor, without nobility, facing the greatest empire of the ancient world and winning. Thus begins the saga of Spartacus, the gladiator who refused to die for the entertainment of the public and decided to turn the history of Rome upside down. Instead of kneeling, he stood up, and beside him, thousands of enslaved fugitives and peasants formed what would become the largest slave revolt of antiquity. In this video, immerse yourself in the complete trajectory of Spartacus, from his humble origins to the moments when he annihilated entire Roman legions. Spartacus was born in Thrace, a region north of Macedonia, between the borders of what would today be Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. His name Spartacus was probably not even his birth name. It was common for slaves to be given names based on their geographical origin, just as Greeks were called Graecus and Syrians were called Syrianus. Spartacus carried in his name the memory of his homeland. But Spartacus was not just any barbarian. According to Plutarch, he was intelligent, cultured, and closer to Hellenic culture than to the tribal stereotype that the Romans used to project onto the peoples of the East. Some accounts suggest that he came to serve as an auxiliary in the Roman legions, a role reserved for foreigners who supported Rome in war. But something went wrong. Perhaps he deserted, perhaps he was betrayed. The fact is that he was captured, tried, and sold into slavery. From then on, Spartacus was thrown into the shadows of the Roman system. But that man, trained as a soldier and shaped by adversity, would not break easily. After being captured, Spartacus was sent to one of the cruelest places in the Roman Empire, a gladiator school in Capua run by a lanista named Lentulus Batiatus. These schools were true factories of bloody entertainment where men were trained to kill or die before crowds. There, Spartacus met others condemned to the arena, strong, brutal men, many of them criminals or prisoners of war. Spartacus stood out not only for his physical strength, but also for his natural charisma and strategic vision. He quickly earned the respect of his fellow gladiators, even among the most violent. While other gladiators only thought about surviving, Spartacus planned to escape in the shadows of the corridors, far from the eyes of the guards. He began to form alliances, observing, listening, and organizing. What seemed to be just a group of isolated fighters began to transform into a secret network of insurrection. The moment came in 73 BC. Without access to swords or spears, Spartacus and some 70 gladiators put a desperate plan into action to escape. Armed with kitchen utensils, knives, spears, and courage, they killed the guards, broke into the school's storerooms, and stole armor and weapons. It was an insane escape, but it worked. They fled along the roads of Campania, gathering other slaves along the way. Soon they chose 3 leaders to guide the group: Spartacus, Chryso, and Enomao. A trio that combined tactical strength and leadership, but the figure of Spartacus soon stood out as the brain and soul of the revolt. The first battles were against local troops sent in an improvised manner by Roman magistrates. The gladiators, with their brute strength and intensive training, easily annihilated the soldiers. What began as an escape was now an open war, and Rome did not yet know it, but it was about to face the largest slave uprising in its history. Throughout the countryside, enslaved people began to flee from estates and villas, marching toward the rebels. In a few weeks, the group of gladiators transformed into an improvised army. Poor peasants, shepherds armed with tools, deserters, criminals, and even captured soldiers joined the cause. For many, fighting even without hope was better than continuing to live in chains. Spartacus led the group to Mount Vesubio, a strategic and elevated point where they set up a camp and reorganized. Rome was in shock, reacted quickly. The Senate sent the praetor Callo Claudio Glabro with a force of 3,000 men. Glabro thought it would be a simple mission to surround the mountain and let hunger do the dirty work. But Spartacus was not predictable. With braided vines, his men made ropes and climbed the slopes during the night, descending where the Romans did not expect them. They circled around to the rear, attacked by surprise, and destroyed the Roman army. After the victory at the Vesubio, Spartacus not only survived, but advanced with the weapons captured from the Romans. His men were now well armed, and more important, they were inspired. The revolt ceased to be a local movement. Spartacus began to march through the cities of southern Italy, freeing slaves, defeating local troops, and looting arsenals. But there was one essential detail. He reorganized his army. It was no longer a disorderly band. He established formations, created chains of command, and began to train new recruits. Some accounts indicate that he prohibited gold and silver, encouraging his soldiers to bring only what was necessary for war, mainly iron to make more weapons. The army grew from 70 gladiators. Spartacus now commanded more than 40,000 men, and that number continued to increase with each new victory. Desperate men, former slaves, peasants, soldiers, deserters, each with a story of suffering and a reason to fight. Rome, wounded in its pride, decided to act more decisively this time, sending the praetor Barinius, accompanied by 2 auxiliary commanders with clear orders, to put an end to Spartacus once and for all. But like the previous ones, Barinio underestimated the rebels, dividing his forces, thinking he could surround Spartacus and force him to surrender. It was a typical Roman tactic that worked well against predictable enemies, but Spartacus was not predictable. He attacked quickly, taking advantage of the division of the troops, and defeated part of Barinio's army. Barinio's army with brute force and cunning. Then with his better trained and better armed army, he went directly against the commander himself. The defeat was total. Barinio barely escaped with his life, without weapons, without men, and without his magistrate's robe, which was captured by the rebels as a symbol of mockery. And then came the climax, the moment when Spartacus came closest to truly changing the fate of the Republic. At the end of the year 73 BC, what had begun as an escape of gladiators had become one of the largest independent armies in Roman history. Spartacus now led more than 70,000 men, and that number continued to grow with each village conquered and each battle won. But contrary to Rome's expectations, Spartacus did not march directly on the capital. He chose to settle in southern Italy, where he set up fortified camps and reorganized his forces. He began to plan something even more ambitious, a prolonged war. He banned the use of gold and silver, reinforcing the idea that his struggle was not for wealth, but for freedom and survival. He encouraged the use and production of iron weapons and created systems of training, resource distribution, and discipline. It was not just an army, it was an armed social movement. But with the explosive growth of the rebel army, the first internal fractures also appeared. Spartacus was not the only leader with a voice among the insurgents, and the most influential on side was Chrysus, his companion since their days at the Gladiator school. But the two had different visions for the future of the revolt. Spartacus wanted to cross the Alps. His plan was to escape Italy, disperse the Roman forces, and allow his followers to return to their homelands. For him, it was a fight for freedom and survival. Chrysos, on the other hand, wanted to continue attacking Rome. Driven by hatred and a desire for revenge, he believed that the rebels could and should continue the offensive, punish their former masters, take cities, and challenge the heart of the Republic. In the end, the disagreement was irreconcilable, and so Chryso broke away, taking with him some 30,000 men, almost half of the rebel army. It was a risky decision that weakened the strength and cohesion of the movement. Now isolated with his 30,000 men, he was intercepted by the Roman legions led by the public consul Valerius Publicola. Without the strategic support of Spartacus and facing more organized troops, Chryso was cornered near Mount Gargano. The battle was brutal, and Chryso and most of his men died in combat. The news reached Spartacus like a deep blow. Losing a brother in arms was a tragedy, but losing a leader in front of the eyes of the enemy was also a political risk. Spartacus had to respond with a symbolic and terrifying act. He forced 300 Roman prisoners to fight each other to the death as gladiators in honor of Christ. The Romans reorganized their forces. 2 armies were sent against Spartacus, and even though he was surrounded, he achieved the unthinkable. He defeated both separately using tactics of mobility and surprise. But now the war took on a different tone. The psychological siege began, and Spartacus knew that time was against him. Spartacus's victories had left the Republic demoralized. An army of slaves had repeatedly defeated regular troops, consuls, and auxiliaries. It was a military scandal. The Senate appointed new consuls and sent several armies in different directions to surround Spartacus. But even so, the rebel general did not stop. With some 120,000 men under his command, Spartacus continued to win. and he did so quickly, defeating Roman divisions one by one, exploiting the terrain and attacking the flanks, using ambushes and tactical movements with precision. But while Spartacus's sword cut, something quieter was corroding his army. The lack of traditional military organization. His army was huge but heterogeneous. Newly freed slaves, armed peasants, deserting soldiers, tribes of different origins. There was little unified discipline. Many had different goals. Some just wanted to escape, others sought revenge, others looted. Spartacus's leadership kept everything together with charisma and talent, but it was a tightrope walk to the limit. Rome knew it and decided to bet on a cold, calculating man, a man willing to do whatever it took. That man was Marcus Licinius Crassus. With Crassus's pressure mounting and the legions closing in from all sides, Spartacus knew that his only chance of survival was to escape from Italy. His bold plan was to cross the sea to Sicily, where he hoped to reignite ancient slave revolts and rebuild his movement. Spartacus negotiated with Sicilian pirates who were experts in clandestine transport across the Mediterranean. But hope turned to frustration when he was betrayed. The pirates accepted payment and disappeared, leaving Spartacus on the seashore with thousands of men and no ships. He tried to improvise rafts. He did everything possible to open a route of escape by sea, but Crassus was already one step ahead. He ordered the entire coast to be blocked to prevent any crossing and isolate the rebel army in a trap with no way out. Then Crassus did the unthinkable. He built a line of containment more than 60 kilometers long with walls, moats and fortifications, a gigantic military wall crossing the peninsula and completely surrounding Spartacus and his men in southern Italy without supplies. With time against them and psychological pressure growing, the situation was becoming increasingly untenable. The siege was complete, the men hungry, hope fading. Spartacus knew there would be no rescue or pardon, but he also knew that there was still a choice to be made, to fight or to surrender, and he was never a man to surrender. In a symbolic gesture, he killed his own horse in front of his troops. He said that if he won, he would have horses to spare, and if he died, he would not need one. It was an act of courage, but also of farewell. Spartacus had decided to go all the way. He organized the attack with precision, using the weight of the rebellious human mass to break part of the wall built by Crassus, opening the way for a final desperate offensive. He marched with his men to the banks of the Sella River, where they faced the Roman legions head-on. That day, Spartacus fought ferociously, defeating 2 centurions. He advanced with his shield in front and tried to reach Crassus himself, who was commanding from the rear. It was as if at that moment he wanted to cut off the head of the empire with his own hands, but he did not succeed. He was mortally wounded on the battlefield, and even as he fell, he continued to fight on his knees, surrounded by enemies, wielding his sword until his last breath. His body was never found, but his name was never forgotten. After the battle, what remained of his army was brutally suppressed. Nearly 6,000 survivors were crucified along the Via Appia, the road that connected Capua with Rome, a spectacle of terror and punishment ordered by Crassus as a warning to the world that this was how those who defied the Republic would end. When the dust settled, Pompey, returning victorious from Hispania, arrived too late to crush the last pockets of resistance. He took the political credit and honors in the Senate. Crassus, although effective, was left with a reputation for being ruthless. If you like this content, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. And as always, may Mars guide you in battle.